Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, students of B.Ed third. Uh, our subject English language education, and our today's topic is teaching methods, the methodologies that are used in teaching English language. So, I have included here the gist or crux of some of the most popularly used methods uh, in teaching language, which we will be discussing one by one. So the first one is the direct method. If you see in this method, the teaching is done entirely in the target language. The learner is not allowed to use his or her mother tongue. Grammar rules are avoided and there is emphasis on good pronunciation. Now, in this method, the way an advanced way or method of learning a language is that you use the target language for your communication, where students are encouraged to use the target language irrespective of the mistakes or errors they make while communicating. This is a practical approach, a practical way of learning a target language. So because the target language is used directly, so ultimately for the beginners or the new learners, it would be difficult to follow the rules of the grammar, and that is why we say that grammar rules are avoided and there is emphasis on good pronunciation. So you just imitate the native speakers and you use the target language in order to acquire or learn that language. Okay, next we have the grammar translation method known as GTM. Learning is largely by translation to and from the target language. Grammar rules are to be memorized and long lists of vocabulary learned by heart. There is little or no emphasis placed on developing oral ability. Now, this is the method that all of you might have come across or experienced in your schools. The way we were taught our English books, including stories and essays and all those chapters, etc., which were translated word by word, sentences, and then we were also supposed to learn the rules of the grammar, the tenses and the active passive and direct and indirect narrations and parts of speech, and then the subject verb agreements and all those things that are related to the proper expression of a language, of a second language. So in grammar translation method, but because we are not using the language directly and we are interpreting or translating the target language into our own language and accordingly learning that language, so we have to be very careful about the rules and the structures and all those principles governing that target language. Uh, modern times, in modern times, grammar translation method appears to be or seems to be a hectic job, because whatever, no matter how much we excel in that language, still there is the emphasis or the ability of expressing yourself orally in the target language cannot be developed, because we are stuck in the rules and all those cliches translations of the target language. Then we have the audiolingual theory. The theory behind this method is that learning a language means acquiring habits. There is much practice of dialogues of every situations. New language is first heard and extensively drilled before being seen in a certain form. Now this approach, this method of learning a target language depends mainly and mostly on situations. Is that in how you are going to use a language, the target language, in a certain situation. Students, they are exposed, they are given situations, or situations are created for them. First, they are exposed to the target language, how one would use a language in a certain situation. And this also enables them to directly learn how native speakers use their language in the respective situations or conditions. So new language is first heard and extensively drilled, meaning thereby that each and every aspect of the target language is observed through the native speakers, through the native users of the target language, rather than or as contrary to the GTM or other methods. Then we have the structural approach. And this method sees language as a complex of grammatical rules which are to be learned one at a time in a set order. So, for example, the verb to be. Now, this structural approach it emphasizes or focuses on the structure of a language. The same thing that grammatical rules are to be learned in a certain order in which they are supposed to be learned. So again, in the structural approach, the emphasis or the focus is on the structure of the language, which we mostly consider or pay attention to in our writing. This method may be very fruitful in your writings, but when it comes to the oral communication, which forms a major part of our communication, this structural approach might not work as effectively as the previous audiolingual method that we just discussed. So, as the name indicates, the structural approach emphasizes or focuses on the structure of the language. And when we talk about the structure, everything related to grammar, how sentences are made, how they are expressed, then subject-verb agreements, different kinds of sentences, all those things are to be considered and learned in order to express yourself in the target language. Okay, Suggestopedia. The theory is that if this Suggestopedia, this theory says that if the learner of a target language, if he is able to receive and digest a language without any barriers, mental barriers or blocks, most of the time it happens that certain students, they are slow in learning a language, and when they are asked, they say that the language is difficult. So this word difficult, which they had in their minds, which they have in their minds already, it blocks the way, or it proves as a hurdle in learning a new language. Because when you say that a thing cannot be done, it surely cannot be done. It is the learner of the language who can make things easy or difficult for himself or herself. So, in Suggestopedia, in this theory, the students or the learners of the new language, they are encouraged that the target language is easy and it could be learned easily without any problems. It is a kind of encouragement to the learner and making him at ease with the target language, no matter how difficult it might appear to be. So, Suggestopedia is a kind of mental treatment or grooming or encouragement or motivation for the learner of the language, which helps them in reducing the fear of learning a new language. Then we have the total physical response, the TPR. TPR works by having the learner respond to simple commands such as stand up and close your books, go to the window and open it. In this method, in the total physical response, the learner is involved physically in the language through the use of certain commands or expressions as we have just discussed. Involving a student in the target language by giving commands is what we call the total physical response. So the method stresses the importance of auditory comprehension, how a language is spoken and then how it is perceived by the learner of the language. The next method is the communicative language teaching. I will read out that the focus of this method is to enable the learner to communicate effectively and appropriately in various situations he or she would likely to find herself in. The content of CLT courses are functions such as inviting, suggesting, complaining, or notions such as the expressions of time, quantity, or location. Now, communicative language, the name itself it indicates that language is used with the learners in a practical way. How language is commonly used by the natives for communication. So everyday routine life or everyday situations which we come across in our daily lives, those things are brought up front. The learners are exposed to situations which everybody comes across almost every day. This method helps the learners to know how language works in routine life. So it could be effective for the new learners as situational, routine life or situations which are experienced by people almost every day. Those things are focused, and the learners are introduced to the use of language in certain situations. So this could be an effective way of learning a new language, the target language. Okay, the silent way. It is called silent because the teacher, the interaction of the teacher is minimum. Why? So that the learner can be in control of what he wants to say. So the teacher is silent and opportunity is given to the learner without interference from the teacher, and he is allowed to say whatever he wants to say in the target language in his own way. This way enables the learner to openly express himself, and if mistakes are made by the learner, that could later on be rectified by the teacher. The silent way is a method where full freedom or authority is given to the learner of the target language to express himself in the target language in any way he wants to, and then afterwards the teacher might rectify errors or mistakes made by the learner. Okay, community language learning. Gaps or distances between the students and the teachers might also prove as a hurdle or a blockage in learning a target language. Now, in community language learning, stress is given, or it is stressed. Emphasis is to reduce or minimize the gap between the learner and the teacher. It is only that a student is mentally comfortable with his teacher that he will be able to learn the target language easily. So what happens is that the student who talks in his mother tongue, and the same things are translated in the target language by the teacher. And once they are translated, they are repeated by the student. So this helps the student in knowing how to express himself in any situation, because in mother tongue a student can express anything in a much effective way as compared to the target language, because they are learners. So in the mother tongue they express themselves openly, freely. The same expressions of the student, they are translated by the teacher for the student, and then it is repeated by the student in order to make him realize how to express or translate or say the same things in the target language. Okay, immersion. Immersion is the method that we have experienced at our schools. The learners of the target language, they are put in a situation where they are supposed to study different subjects in the target language, subjects like math or science or other humanities, what we commonly call as art subjects here. All those subjects, they are taught in the target language, and the purpose is the same, to acquire or to learn the target language. So students, when they learn different subjects other than language, when they are also learned or they are being taught in the target language, this theory, it advocates that second language could be acquired through this way, when different subjects are taught throughout the day in the target language. This helps in learning the target language. In task-based language learning, the focus of the teaching is on the completion of a task, which in itself is interesting to the learners. Now, in task-based learning, language learning, students, they are given projects or tasks which they are supposed to complete and then deliver. For example, if I ask one of my students, while we are studying English language education, and if I ask one of you to prepare a presentation on, let's say, writing or reading or speaking, and the student prepares that and then presents the same. This is task-based language learning, because the student is supposed to prepare, whether it is a presentation or it is a piece of writing. They have to use the target language, they have to research, they have to study, they have to go for books, they have to consult or use the internet in order to gather material for the task. Now, this gives exposure to the student in the target language, because it is the very language he is supposed to use in completing the task. Involvement of the student in such activities where they are supposed to prepare something to complete a task, it helps them in facing or looking for the use of language in different situations. Then we have the natural approach. The natural approach, propounded by Professor S. Strachan, stresses the similarities between learning the first and the second languages. Now, the way first language is acquired, there are no corrections, and the learner is exposed to the language, the target language, which is either understood by the learner or is made to be understood by the learner. Things are made easy for the learner, and the mistakes that the learner makes in the use of the language, they are not rectified, they are not corrected. That is why it is called as the natural approach, because the way first language is learned, no one rectifies the mistakes that are made in the structure of language, whether that is the first language, or in this case the second language also. So you will never find an adult rectifying the grammar of a child using his first language. Suppose, for example, nobody corrected the grammar of my mother tongue, which is Pashto, and when I was learning Pashto, nobody rectified me or pointed out the grammatical or structural mistakes that we made during the learning of the first language. Now, the theory in this approach is very much similar to the first language, is that you expose the learner to the target language, make things easy for him, and if they are not easy, they are translated, and the learner is made to understand the terms, expressions that he would be using. So second language is brought at par with the first language acquisition. That is why this approach is also the natural approach. Okay, the lexical syllabus. Uh, the computer analysis of a language. Through the computer analysis of a language, the most common used words or expressions, they are brought together, and the teachers, they teach the same words and expressions in order of their frequency, how frequently those expressions or words are used in everyday communication. So the lexical syllabus, it confronts the learner with the most widely or broadly used words, terms, and expressions in the target language, and the order in which they are taught is through the order of their frequency, how repeatedly or how frequently a word or expression is used in a certain language, and emphasis is placed on the use of authentic material. Authentic material should be used. There are words, certain words and expressions which are used more frequently in a language than others. So those common words, everyday words, they are combined, they are united, and the learner is confronted with those words. He is supposed to learn the use of those words, the meanings of those words, and the usage of those words. Personalized learning. Uh, they say that the syllabus that is designed or made for each class or whatever we use, they are designed keeping in mind certain standard of a student of the respective class or degree. Now, no two leaves in the universe are the same. Forget about humans. How could we use one syllabus or on students who are completely diverse and different from one another? This personalized learning is an answer to this very question, that because no two students could be the same in their mentality, in their perceptions, in their capabilities, in their potentials. So one uniform syllabus should not be taught. They say is that the teachers should design their lessons, the syllabuses, the teachings to the according to the needs and standard of each and every student individually. And when it comes to individual students, lessons should be designed according to the competence, the potentials, and the abilities of every individual student.